follow mushrooms.
And so begins our
Okay. I've had worse jobs to do than follow mushrooms. Well, I moved this week. I did.
Woo!
And as I said, I simply decided that I was going to make it a spiritual experience or die trying.
Yeah.
And I'm here, so obviously something positive happened along the way. I moved to a senior living apartment building, which is a wonderful opportunity. I've been on the waiting list for years and had no idea I was ever going to be called, but lo and behold, when Spirit said it was time, it was time. But it means downsizing. Oh, the stuff I accumulated, and where did it come from, and what made me think I ever needed to hang on to it all, you know? And how can I get rid of it? But step by step, with some help, of course, it happened. And things got packed, and things got given away, and things got thrown out. And I moved on Monday. And then, feeling very, very good about having managed the move, I suddenly looked around me, and there were boxes everywhere. And I thought, oh, now I have to move in. Oh, this is a two-part deal. And in many ways, I think that's the hardest part, don't you? Where am I going to put this all? And how's it all going to fit together? And what did I forget to bring with me, or what do I have to go out and buy? And it's been a crazy week. As I am, you know, I'm a big fan of Richard Rohr's and his weekly messages. And on Monday, the day of my move, his message was, or a quote from it, "The path of descent is the path of transformation. Darkness, failure, relapse, death, and woundedness are our primary teachers." Now that could sound like pretty bad news, but it's really very good news. It's really what got me through. I'm not going through these negative experiences because I've done something wrong or I have to change something or make something right. I'm going through it because I've agreed to go through it. I'm going through it because on some deep soul level, this is my job to do. This is what I do. I came onto this planet as a spiritual being in order, among other things, to make that move and share as widely as I can the positive energies that can come out of it. But Richard is very clear on the fact that Jesus was not punished for being good. Jesus went through his crucifixion experience because he was showing us what we go through on a regular basis. I mean, you go through a crucifixion at least one every day, I would bet. A challenge that you simply have to surrender to. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's not a sign that something has to change. It's a sign that you have to surrender. There's the key word. We have to surrender. And who likes surrender? You know, that when I first started with my AA program, the word surrender in the first step just made me crazy. Why should I surrender? I need the power to make the changes, so why talk about surrender? But surrender is not giving up. It's surrendering the lesser power to the greater power. It's stopping that voice in my head that says, I've got to manage this, I've got to figure it out. I've got to figure out every step of this move along the way. I've got to make it happen. Instead of saying, I'm willing to make it happen, I'm willing to work with the process, and I trust that the process will be there and unfolding as it's needed. And so it has proved to be. Don't you find that to be true in your lives too? I mean, can you think of an example of when you felt crucified and came out of it to realize that it was a positive thing that happened? even though it didn't seem so at the time. When I got moved, of course, I had to, because an essential part of moving anymore is replugging yourself, reconnecting yourself, your computers and your laptops and everything else to the new reality. And in order to check if my printer was connected, I just went at random on my my computer page and just pulled something up, didn't even notice what. I just wanted to see if it would print. That was the only question. And what came out, interestingly enough, is something I wrote years ago called 12 Steps to Spiritual Realization. And I may have shared from this list before. I don't think I've ever shared the list. The 12 steps saved my life on an ongoing basis. And they were specifically written, of course, for alcohol. They're adapted now to many, many different addictions. And the truth that I've come to is that we are all addicts. We are all addicted to being human. We're addicted to what seems to be the reality in which we live. We're addicted to the choices we make, the ways in which we interact with other people. We're addicted to a belief in our own smallness. We're addicted to a belief that somehow we are here as spiritual beings having a human experience for negative reasons, that we have to overcome the human experience in order to be fully spiritual. That's not the case. That's not what Jesus ever taught. And it's not what works when you try living with these principles. The truth is, we are here as spiritual beings because we have been entrusted with a great spiritual work, which is the work of transformation, as Richard said in his quote. We are here to transform this human experience into an experience of spirit, with a capital S. Why? I have no real clue. I don't think we really get to know why we're doing all of this. We have agreed to it on some very deep level. Before we ever came into this life, we agreed that we would come here and do this. It seemed like a good idea at the time. We may have occasion to regret that choice or to make it wish we had made another choice, but we're here because we are spiritually strong. And I became aware very early on when my recovery work started to meld into my spiritual work, and I found myself in Unity and heading from ministerial school to my utter astonishment. I discovered that I began to realize that the people I was meeting in meetings, the people who are consciously in recovery, are some of the most spiritually strong people on the planet. We think we recover so that we can get back our strength, when really we're recovering in our strength. We're recovering as our strength. We are recovering through that process, that word comes up again, of surrender. I surrender to the process. I surrender to the higher power within me, not to a higher power out there somewhere, although that can work too, because there's no place God is not, as we affirm in the first principle. So it really doesn't a whole lot matter where you visualize the God you're surrendering to. But I had a very difficult time surrendering to a distant God. And it was only when I found Unity and began to internalize this process more and more that I really found the power of the steps through Unity. Now, I'm sure you know that Unity and the 12 steps have been closely related throughout both of their lifetimes. Unity is somewhat older, but many Unity centers hold AA meetings or NA meetings or other AA meetings. And there's a continual recognition that we're really talking about the same principles, whether we could name them 5 or whether we name them 12. We're talking about the same principles, the same process that helps us transform human challenges into spiritual opportunities. Human challenges into spiritual opportunities. So I took it upon myself, I would never claim it or publish it, but just for my own purposes, I rephrased the steps in a way that made sense to me in terms of my spiritual understanding. So first, I admit that I lack the personal power to resolve the challenges of my life. Now that's a huge step. And it's a step that works in 2 directions. I acknowledge that I lack the personal power to resolve the challenges of my life. There's an underlying assumption that I should have the personal power to resolve the challenges of my life. But the truth is that I was never meant to have the personal power. It was never meant to be a job for me alone to handle my own life. I could not have managed the move if I hadn't surrendered to some people who were willing to help. Some of them simply stepped forward to help, some of them I paid to help. In either case, it was a question of saying, I need the help. I don't have the power on my own. I believe that I am one with a greater power, available to resolve challenges and restore me to a sense of wholeness. And I would change that if I were writing it today from I believe to I know. Carl Jung was once asked in a press conference if he believed in God, and he said, I don't believe, I know. And I've always liked that and embraced that statement. So I know that I am one with a greater power. I am the greater power in expression. If God is everywhere present, then I am God present. There are no exceptions to that. It isn't God is everywhere around me present. God is everywhere present. And so that divinity is the truth of who I am. I choose to surrender my personal will to the loving guidance of that power. And that, of course, is the key step that makes everything else possible. You can know God in theory, but until you're willing to put it to work in your life, then it's only going to be a theory, and you're still going to be struggling with it as you move along. I make a fearless and thorough personal inventory, naming the false beliefs about myself and others that have been creating negative experiences. I name my fears. That's what that really means. I don't try to deny them or hide them or shove them down somewhere deep inside. I name my fears. And that allows me to move forward with those fears, working with them rather than trying to run from them. Richard Rohr said this week, if we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it, usually to those closest to us, our family, our friends, our co-workers, our children, very often, right? So it's really naming my fears, not blaming them on somebody else, not blaming them on myself even, simply saying these are the thoughts, these are the beliefs that are holding me back. These are the beliefs that are getting in my way. These are the beliefs that I really need to be able to release. And then once you name them, and it's interesting that it's not enough to just name them to yourself. But number 4, I make a fearless and thorough personal inventory, naming the false beliefs about myself. And then 5, I admit to that greater power within myself and to another human being. Because I am engaged in this experience with others. I am sharing my fears with others. I have been sharing my fears with others. I need to share that awareness with others too. I need to be completely open to others about who I am. I'm surprised sometimes when I dialogue, do email communication with people who write me through the International Unity website, how many of them are secretive about their spiritual practices. Feel like I can't tell anybody. I don't want anybody to know that I feel this way or that this resonates with me. I don't. How can I do this without my spouse finding out, or my mother, or my friends, or whatever? And you really can't. You really can't. You have to be open and who you are. You have to be completely who you are. Because anything else is based on what? It's based on fear. I'm afraid I won't be okay. I'm afraid of what they may think of me. And we can't move forward based on fear. So the feeling that I need to be secretive about it doesn't mean I have to go around stopping everybody on the street to tell them about the 5 steps. But it means I have to be willing to share. I have to be upfront about what I'm believing and what I'm trying to use as the basis of my life. I am entirely willing to release false beliefs and embrace new possibilities. Given these fears that I've now named and shared, am I willing to release them? We can get quite attached to our fears, can't we? We can get quite attached to the idea of limitation is a really tricky one. Because it's easy to say, well, I guess it's up to God, instead of owning that is like saying it's up to me. It's up to, it's up to me. I have to be willing to release those fears and false beliefs. And then to humbly release them, to let them go. I don't have to put them anywhere, I don't have to do anything with them. I let them go. And Spirit will take it from there. Then we get into okay, now that I've made this huge step in my life, this huge surrender to the greater power that I now know I am, how do I live my life going forward? What in the world how do I make every choice every day? How do I get through each challenge? Well, first I make a list of persons I believe I have harmed through my false beliefs, and I'm willing to make amends. Again, it doesn't mean I have to chase them down and force them to love me. When I first got into the 12 steps, I thought that was the case. So that was my favorite step. I thought I'll just run around to tell everybody I offended, and they'll have to forgive me and I can offend them again. But there's a reason why it's not the first step, and there's a reason why it comes in later in the order. We simply have to acknowledge the ways in which our fears have affected other people and affected ourselves, because we have to forgive ourselves as well for some of the craziness that we have been a part of. I make amends to such persons whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I found that I've been sober this week. I did not realize that. This week is my 44th anniversary.
Woo!
I did not make that connection when I picked this up and decided to work with it today. But at first I thought, well, I'll have to run around and find all these people. But I find, even after 44 years, I'll turn a corner and there will be somebody from my past.
Wow.
And an opportunity to do a forgiveness. To do it. And it's usually not do you remember what happened all those years ago and can you ever forgive me? But just, this is who I am now. And this is how I see you now. And can we go forward from there? And it's always the case that we can. I don't have to make these steps happen any more than I have to make these steps happen. They unfold as I allow them to unfold within me. I continue to take daily inventory, immediately dissolving any false beliefs that might appear in my consciousness. That was where I lived this week, I swear. Because when you're going through something like a move, everything seems, it's just so easy to fall back into old thinking. This is my fault, or this is the world's fault, or this is somebody's fault. And I shouldn't have this, or I shouldn't have that. I had to continually remind myself that I am now living in the truth of these 5 principles. I don't live in the truth of blame and shame and apology or regret even. I live in an energy of new possibilities, so that when I would get overwhelmed by the boxes to be unpacked or the decisions to be made about where to put things, instead of seeing it as a poor me problem, I thought, okay, how is Spirit expressing through this? How is this going to work? And it was not until it was Thursday. So I moved Monday. Thursday, the last box left my apartment. Now there's still a lot of organizing to do, but it, what seemed to be overwhelming, when you just said, okay, well, let it unfold, let it happen. It happened. No big deal. I seek through prayer and meditation, a beautiful meditation today, Jennifer, to improve my conscious contact with my greater power, seeking only to know more about my life purpose and to surrender to that power within me that can and will achieve that purpose. All I need to do is to constantly remind myself that I am here for a spiritual purpose. Everything else serves that purpose in one way or another. It may serve it, it may impede it in a way that allows me to make a new choice and grow in the process. So it's seeking through prayer and meditation to get to be clear about my own life purpose. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to find out what it is. I'll wake up and it'll be written on that blackboard over there or something. It means that as long as I know it's there, I don't have to know the details. I don't have to know exactly what that purpose is or how it's going to express. I simply have to be willing to work with it at all times, to work with it always. And then finally, the one that ties in so perfectly with the fifth principle. I practice this same principle on other challenges as they arise, and I use and share the process to help others find their own oneness with the power of infinite law. I continue to apply the same principles to things that came up in my life, like moving, that are less dramatic perhaps than stopping drinking and drugs, but are no less dangerous and important to handle. I use the same principles, 44 years. When I started, I thought, well, I'll get the hang of this in 6 weeks, and then what do I do for an encore? I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm still using the steps, still remembering to use them in my life. So that's a little more disjointed than I intended. I was really caught off base by the fact that this is my 44th anniversary week. No wonder Spirit said, why did you talk about the 12 steps today? I thought, okay, well, a little, but I guess I can. Any thoughts or questions? Or yeah, Jennifer.
First of all, I love the synchronicity that that's what printed out on your printer. Like,
Right.
It's no accident. That's
No, none.
It's wonderful. It wasn't disjointed at all. What do you think about using the word, all right, so the word surrender is not a word that I'm uncomfortable with, but I'm very aware that it, for me anyway, it comes from a very Western tradition. And so I wonder what you think about perhaps a substitution or an alternative, if you will, using the words radical acceptance or welcoming for surrender. So to me, the difference is, or perhaps the slight adjustment, is when we have radical acceptance of what is, our fears, whatever it is that's inside of us, that there's no pushing it away, there's no need to change it, but by seeing and recognizing what's inside of us, that's when, and I use this Western term, grace maybe comes in, and that's where the transformation takes place, is that the transformation is not our work, but that there's a sense of, by welcoming what is, by having radical acceptance for whatever parts of me are complaining or have thoughts or ideas about things, that's what opens me up to the fullness of my true power. And that it's almost not me, the ego, the self doing it, but it's me fully welcoming that whatever's present, and that's what opens me up to change.
That certainly makes sense, and it certainly would work. I have a little bit of acceptance should not connote that I'm going to live with this
Right.
fear or
It's
this
just
worry.
that it's here now.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like, yay, there's fear here, or I want to hold on, or it's just, it's almost like a survey. And so whatever is there, even, then I'm welcoming even my resistance. Instead of saying, there's my resistance, I'm going to get rid of that too. That I say, resistance is here. There's a part of my psyche that is resistant or has fear. You're welcome to the conversation. You don't get to dominate it, but you're welcome here too. I'm welcoming all parts of myself to the table.
Yeah, that certainly works for me. I like the word release. I release these fears. I don't judge them, as you were just saying. I don't oppose them. I don't try to put them in a closet somewhere or destroy them. I release their energy to the greater power that I now know is who I am. So it's almost like dissolving. I dissolve the fears, or I allow the power within me, the power that I am, to dissolve the fears.
I guess that second way is more, because even saying I release it, it's still, I'm doing somehow I'm broken, somehow there's something that needs to be fixed about me, and so I'm going to take action to do that. But sometimes dissolving fears takes time, or there's a process. So to me, the welcoming allows that to happen without, with that power of grace.
And the other thing is that very often I don't need to focus on any specific fear. I simply need to be the allness that I am, and then the fears will take care of themselves. As you were saying, I don't have to do anything to make that happen. My mortal mind doesn't have to be involved in this if I just release into the certainty of my spiritual truth. Yeah? Thanks. Good. Yeah, Bob.
I like the word surrender. Now I like it. The first 40 years of my life, it was hard to take, but it was really clear to me that surrendering to correction was a really positive thing to do. And that's what the word surrender and correction mean a lot to me.
Okay. As long as correction doesn't suggest that there's something wrong that has to be
Open
fixed.
to correction.
Open to correction, open to change. Open to change. That's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a decade behind you as far as the steps go, but I've been in Al-Anon, and rather than looking at myself as broken, I look at myself, as you quoted from Richard Rohr, wounded. I got wounded in my childhood. And that has really, in the last 9 years, I go to Al-Anon and ACA, which is another program known as ACA, and it's kind of getting its sea legs. But the thing I learned about surrender, or a lot of things, was as a child, in my childhood, you mentioned affecting children, I thought I had to save my family. I was a little kid, and this madness was going on, and I thought I had to save my family and do something before I became a teenager. I'm talking as a young kid. And by doing all that, that's where a lot of my stuff originated. So to be powerless was frightening to me. The surrender was frightening, because if if I had surrendered as a little kid that way, I would have been, it was too overwhelming. What was going on was too overwhelming, and I was fearing for my own survival, because these were the grown-ups that were supposed to be providing security, safety, that kind of stuff, and it didn't happen. And it's multi-generational and all that, so it's really, the steps have really opened up for me as or the principles that you went over, whether they're unity or the 12 steps have opened up for me more and more as I looked at childhood trauma and what happened there and healed from that, in fellowship, not alone, in fellowship. Thank you.
Yeah, that's important. That's I said, and that's very important, the fellowship.
Yeah.
Is really essential. You can't shut yourself off and do this work by yourself and then come out and be in the world that way. You have to be willing to engage the process every day, every kind of choice you're making, right? Yeah.
Sometimes there is surrendering, and then there's also, I guess, holding on, letting go of sometimes, letting go sometimes when you feel you've done everything you could. And I think also the holding on is I think sometimes being holding on to some kind of faith, whatever that is. Can you explain? I mean, both in the spirit you have, both terms are good, but sometimes it gets confusing.
I think for me, I can only speak for myself, for me the confusion comes with the phrase holding on, because again, that suggests it's something that I have to do.
Yeah.
Something that I have to convince my mortal mind
Right.
to hang on. And
Yes.
that never works. You know, that leads, because that hanging on,
Yeah.
to me, holding on is an expression of fear of some kind.
Right.
I'm holding on because I'm afraid to let go.
Mm-hmm.
I have to overcome the fear. I don't necessarily have to. I don't necessarily have to let go. I have to be willing to let go, and then it will stay or it will go depending on what how spirit is working through me at the time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not. I'm not going to hang. I'm not going to decide what to hang on to and what to let go of. I'm going to just let go. I'm going to just surrender, or release, or welcome. That I'm open, without holding on, without hanging, without exceptions, without secrets. I'm welcoming whatever happens, and then I trust that what needs to remain with me will stay with me. What needs to release will release. My mortal mind is not capable of making those choices.